Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. I am Jen Mergel, the Beal Family Senior Curator of Contemporary Art here at the MFA, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Lee Mingwei, and give you some context for this year's Deborah and Martin Hale Visiting Artist Lecture on the occasion of our amazing special exhibition, Lee Mingwei, Sonic Blossom, which is currently on view in our Koch Gallery through April 9th. Now first, context about the Hale Lecture. This was established back in 1997 when Martin and Debbie developed a very important and unique visiting artist fund. It's one that emphasized the tight bond between the School of the Museum of Fine Arts and the Museum of Fine Arts. By these terms, that an esteemed visiting artist would both speak to the museum public, as we are here this evening, but also work directly with the school's students, undergraduates and graduates, the future artists of tomorrow, as a vital part of their learning. Now, past Hale visitors have graced our stage and inspired in our classrooms. And these include the likes of Kara Walker, Hilton Alls, and Patti Smith, to name a few. Yes. So this is a very, very special lecture. So now here we are today. Now, earlier this afternoon, we had 3 classes that were treated to a special visit by Lee Mingwei. Now, who is Lee Mingwei? I hope by the end of tonight, as you get to know him and his art, you'll have that same reaction, wow, like Patti Smith. And I'm so delighted that many of those students are here with us this evening. By way of introduction to Lee Mingwei, I would like to introduce you to the project that you can also see in the museum after tonight's lecture, Sonic Blossom. This is a project that has been described to our visitors as an ongoing, participatory, performance art installation with a chair, a music stand, a costume, and spontaneous song. These are the elements that Lee Mingwei brought to the museum, but he also brought so much more. What you're seeing here is an image of the project when it debuted for its tour across Asia, here in Seoul, South Korea, as well as in Beijing, in China, and in Tokyo, at the Mori Art Museum, where Lee Mingwei held his 20-year survey exhibition, Lee Mingwei and His Relations. So what is this project? Well, it's taken on new form as we've debuted it in the United States here at the MFA. Sonic Blossom involves the talent of an opera singer, and that opera singer being given the choice of one of 5 Lieder by Franz Schubert to sing to a stranger, a guest in the museum. The singer wears a costume with a special cloak inside, with this note that in fact you're very privileged to see because usually only singers can see this. This cloak transforms the wearer into a magical being bestowed with the power to give the gift of music. So I think you can tell that Lee Mingwei's art, being participatory and spontaneous, is also one very deeply rooted in the idea of the gift, especially an exchange of a gift, and often a gift between strangers. At the MFA, this project has touched already hundreds of visitors directly. By my count to date, 450 individuals have accepted the singer's invitation. May I receive the gift, or may I offer you the gift of song? And as individuals have said yes, they have been led to this chair in Koch Gallery, where the singer then chooses one leader to sing to them for 3 to 4 minutes live. not mic'd, just with the power of their own voice. It stopped visitors in their tracks in the museum and has stilled time, reminding people of the importance of a moment and experiencing a moment fully, as, in fact, it was beautifully described by one very special visitor to the project, a work of art that's disappearing as it's being created. It's a project that is titled Sonic Blossom as one that, like a flower, has a moment of live beauty, of intensity, of vigor, and then we know that it will pass and fade. As that live song finishes, our opera singer takes a bow and invites the visitor to walk away and remember that experience. This is a project that is a historic first for the MFA, in that it is the first time we've had a performance art piece on view for an extended period. Every hour that the museum is open, every day a visitor can come in and anticipate or witness or experience for themselves this work of art any minute that we're open, between 10 a.m. through to 4:45 or 9:45 p.m. It's one that has been heard throughout the galleries as the sound stretches through both doors of the Coke Gallery and into other spaces and magnetically draws them in. And the singer is one that wanders throughout the museum, through the galleries as they search for that one visitor who looks ready to receive a gift. That one visitor who might accept and be led, whether they're in the contemporary wing or in the Asian galleries, across the museum, back into the European wing, into that chair to receive that special gift. Tonight you'll have the unique opportunity to learn from Lee Mingwei about a practice that has developed over 2 decades into something that is such a unique and moving experience when felt and seen in person. It is fundamentally a shift for the museum and for me personally to be able to see how individuals can be so moved by a work of art in an instance. And I think you'll learn from what Mingwei tells you about his prior projects this evening, that it's actually not a mystery. There is no secret. It is not complex or strange or impossible to achieve. It's actually very fundamental. His practice is about acknowledging that each of us have a gift, that each of us have something to share, and that each of us can be open or opened by art to feel more deeply, to sense more intensely, and to be present in the moment. Without further ado, please let me welcome Lee Mingwei.
Wow. Okay, thank you. So first of all, thank you all being here on a Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. I know you have better places to go. My relationship with Boston started in 1999 at the Gardner Museum, and I never went away. I'm still here. I'm still working with Gardner Museum, and I'm so grateful and happy to see that these great institutions in Boston, MFA, and the Gardner Museum came together to take care of me while I'm doing Sonic Blossom here. So thank you, Gardner, and thank you, MFA. What I'm going to do for the next 40 minutes is I'll share with you 9 projects. It's going to be pretty fast. They're story-based projects, and they are usually commissioned for museums. The first project is called Money for Art. As you can see, it's a $10 bill. This was a project I did before I went to grad school in '95. So in 1994, on January 1st, I took a $10 bill and went to a cafe in the Castro area called Cafe Flor. Spent about 45 minutes on each of the sculpture. So after 45 minutes of this origami, it transformed into a sculpture. People were quite interested in what I was doing. I would invite them to sit in front of me, and then at the end of this transformation, I said, would you like to have this object? All of them say yes, but what they needed to do for me is to give me their phone number so I can call them back every 6 months. So 6 months later, somebody said that she used it to buy moccasins, somebody used it to buy food. Jennifer, the lady at the bottom here, bought Haagen-Dazs and banana. I asked her, tell me the story behind the transformation. So she said at that time she was so hungry. All she can think of is to buy something to feed herself, and having a piece of artwork doesn't make sense. So she just took it apart and then used it to buy herself some dinner, which is fantastic because this project is about when one thing becomes the other. It's not about right or wrong thing to do. 12 months later, the person said it was stolen. I think he was a little bit embarrassed to tell me that he used it for something else. The person, John, homeless person here, was very interesting for me. At that time, I was a little bit concerned to invite a homeless person to be a part of a project that deals with money. However, my professor said that you should just go and ask him if he wants to be a part of it. And he did. He was a Vietnam vet. So after 12 months, he still has it. Now, whenever I go back to San Francisco, I often go to Cafe Flore, and he is still there. Now he has about 13 of these $10 bills in his wallet. And he has never, ever used any one of them. And he told me he's very, very proud to be a part of this project, also to own a piece of artwork. None of his friends ever say, why don't you use this something for your buying some food? Everybody say, oh, that's really beautiful that you're able to work to keep these objects in your wallet. So back in the museum, what I did was that instead of $10 bills, I used $1. Otherwise, it would be a very expensive project to do. And created 120 of these prototypes, asking people to exchange an object they think is of equal value. Just to show you what people did here, that person had exchanged a bottle of empty Prozac. You can just imagine what happened there. This person actually gave me an ATM card with her PIN number. The next day she came back and said, did you actually find out how much I have? And I say, actually, I know you have $3,200 in there. And she said, why didn't you take money out? And I told her this project is about trust for me between strangers, not about taking advantage of other people, which gave me a different idea of what I want to do into my artwork, which is all about trust between strangers now when I look back. Okay. Next project, Through Master's Eyes. This was about 2004. It was an invitation by the contemporary curator and classical curator at LACMA. So you can just imagine the conversation between these two departments about what art is and what could be art. So they decided to invite a living artist to come look at the classical collection and come up with a contemporary project that both of them can agree and understand as artwork. When I went there, I saw a very, very famous painting by Shi Tao. Shi Tao was an artist that lived between the fall of Ming Dynasty and the rise of the Manchu Dynasty around 1600. This was a painting that has about 7 other images that is within an album. At that time, I was very curious about the idea of copying and imitation between East and West. So in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and probably China, I'm sure it's China also, you learn how to paint from copying your teacher's work. After 10 years, you copy from your teacher's work. And after 20 years, you might be able to do your little doodling, right? But in the West, if you copy someone's work knowingly that that is somebody else's work as if it's your work, then it's really not the best thing to do. So I thought it would be great to put those ideas together and see what happens. What I did was I took Shi Tao's original painting and created two sets of artists. One set of artists are artists that are living in the West, and one set of artists are the one who are from Taiwan. So each set of artists has 5 to 6 artists. The first one from each set copy from the original Shi Tao. The second one copies from the first one, and the third one copy from the second one. I'm going to show you the evolution of Shi Tao's painting according to their understanding of what copying is. So the first set of painting were done by artists who were living in the West. The first one copied from Shi Tao, already hugely different, right? Second one. Third one. Very Las Vegas, yeah? Fourth one. Fifth one, it even has no color to it. It's like a Braille painting. Sixth one. This is by Shazia Sikandar, a dear friend of mine from Pakistan. So let's return to Shi Tao and see what the Taiwanese artist did. The first one copied from Shi Tao. Almost identical, right? Second one. Third one. Fourth one, so very similar. Fifth one. So back in Lakma space, what I did was that I created a kiosk like that in the middle, in the foreground. And then over here, that is the image, the painting from that album where Shi Tao's painting came from. And back here in the vitrine, the top rows are the Taiwanese and the bottom ones are the Western ones. That was the painting that I asked people to copy, or the first one of each set. So starting from here, that is the Western rendition of it from this one here, and the Taiwanese on the top. So in the kiosk, what I did was I made the facsimiles of the copied one, just so I can reintroduce the idea of reading an album, which is quite essential in reading a Chinese painting album. It's all about passage of time. The Mending Project. So a very simple project. When you come to the gallery, I would be there, or another mender would be there with thread and needle, ready to repair any of the clothing that you bring for us to repair. So the way it works is that when you bring this piece of clothing, we'll get the thread from the wall, repair it, and ask you to leave the repaired clothing with us for the duration of the show. And please to come back to the gallery to get this piece of clothing when the show closes. So I wasn't, and I'm still not a very good mender. So this is the way I mend. It's a big mess. And also it's a way of me celebrating the fact that this is a piece of clothing that you cherish so much that you brought it to a stranger to have it repaired. So using the color thread to celebrate the history of this piece of clothing. I also ask people to leave their name and profession with me just for documentation purpose. This is another way of mending. So as the project progresses, you could just see the clothing, also the pile of clothes progress, and very quickly the crisscrossing of each of the thread from the wall and the relationship between the mended cloth and these threads that were pulled from the wall. This image means a lot to me. Let me just explain a little bit. This young lady who was in med school in Columbia, she heard of this project, so she brought something for me to mend. She went back home, showed it to the mother. The mother loved it, and then came back the next day with the daughter, and she had something for me to mend. And you can imagine this picture is actually after they went home, they show it to the grandmother. And she loved the idea so much, so this day, 3 of them came back with something for me to repair. And when I was showing this project at Mori Art Museum, somebody actually, not Mori, at the Gardner Museum, somebody actually told me that they know the people in the picture. So it's really quite wonderful to make that connection. The last day of exhibition, everybody came to get their clothes, repaired clothes. This is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is right at 6 o'clock when the gallery closed. So after a month and a half at the gallery, there were 460 pieces of mended clothes floating around somewhere in New York with colorful thread, and nothing is on the table. So this will be also a part of my survey show at Taipei Fine Art Museum this summer. So if you have anything for me to repair, please come to Taipei. I will be there. Spice Box Nuwa project. So a few years ago, the Jewish Contemporary Art Museum in San Francisco asked me for a project for fundraising purpose. And the first thing that went through my mind was thinking, you're probably asking the wrong artist, because my work, I always see my work kind of commercially not viable. So why would they ask an artist that is of that genre to create a project for them to sell in terms of fundraising? Anyway, so I took on that challenge. What I gave myself as a challenge is that I would create a project that the final ownership of this project, whoever owns this project, actually had to let it go. And I'll show you what I meant by letting it go. Okay. Anyway, so bear with me now. I wanted to create a kite. So I'm thinking of a Taiwanese myth of the goddess of Nuwa. So the myth was that Nuwa was this goddess that creates everything and mends everything. It goes back to mending again. So she married to an unfortunate husband that ruins everything. So one day, her husband, Gong Gong, was wrestling with his best friend, Rong Rong, and they destroyed things again and ripped a huge hole in the sky. So Nuwa thought, oh, what I have to do is go up to the sky and patch the sky with my children's dream, meaning she went out the night before and collected all our dreams to create this beautiful fabric. She flew against the sky to patch the sky, but the only thing she can do is that after she did that, there's still a big hole in the sky. And all she can do at that time is to sacrifice herself so she can save her children by filling that hole in the sky. So here is Nuwa. I was fortunate enough to go back to Taipei and work with one of the living treasure kite master who created this kite out of hand-woven silk and bamboo, which nowadays it's really hard to find bamboo that could, or people who can work with bamboo and silk. So he was generous enough to taught me how to do it and also teach me how to fly the kite. So, because nowadays the kites were created by machine, but when it's created by hand, it has a very different feel. The idea for this project is that when it was auctioned off at Jewish Contemporary, part of the rule of the game of this project, rules of the game is that whoever owns this piece, I encourage this person to write his or her dreams onto the silk kite. And once it's completely fulfilled or filled, this person needs to fly the kite as high as it goes and cut the string. So that's what I was saying, that you really need to let go of this kite by owning it. So he was teaching me how to do it, how to fly the kite, and there she goes. She goes up to the sky one day and patched that hole for all of us. Therefore, we're saved by her gesture. Trilogy of Sounds. This project was commissioned by a wonderful person. Her name was Sophie, who was introduced to me by Pirana, the contemporary curator at the Gardner Museum. So Pirana one day told me that there is a friend of hers who has been following my work for years and would like to have lunch with her. I sure, free lunch, of course, why not? So we met up, and Sophie was one of the most generous and warm person that I have ever met. And at the end of the lunch, she said, "Would you like to come to my house? And maybe we can work out a commission from you if you feel the house speaks to you." I've never been to Scotland at that time, and I thought again, okay, sure. Somebody invites me to their house, I would love to go and see what it's like. So this was, when we went to this place called Isle of Bute, this was her house. Exactly. I was a bit overwhelmed. Coming from a tropical island called Taiwan, this has absolutely nothing to do with my real life, but maybe in the dreams and fairy tale. So she actually happened to be a descendant of Mary Queen of Scots, and this is Mount Stuart, has hundreds of rooms in there. So it took me 4 visits to Mount Stuart to come up with an idea that I think speaks to me and to the site and to the staff there. Again, because this was such an exotic history, I just didn't feel, at the first few times, I just didn't feel like it was my place to say anything or to respond to the site. However, I came up with this project called Trilogy of Sounds. As you can imagine, it's 3 small sound projects. The first sound project is in her living room. Probably not like our living room, right? A magnificent hall. And when you come in, hopefully you'll hear canaries singing. Most of the people thought these are pre-recorded canary. No, but they were living canaries. You go up to the steps, follow the songs of the birds, and this is where you find the birds. So there are 3 cages of canary. The reason why I picked this room was because during World War I, this was what they call the operating theater. So the Marquess of Bute and Lady Bute used Mount Stuart as a naval hospital during those time of World War I. And Sophie's grandmother, Lady of Bute, was a nurse at that time and took care of about 1,200 soldiers. So I was just thinking all these people's life being saved and cured, and let's create a beautiful environment with exotic plants and birds to celebrate these lives. Okay, so here are my canary friends. So the second part of the sound is also within the palace. But you have to go through her dining room with all her ancestral portraits there, her chapel. And you find the source of this sound, which usually the door here, it's closed, but for documentation purpose, I opened it up. This space is called the armory. So for the second part of the sound project, I invited the student from the local music school. Instead of practicing at home or at school, they just practice in armory with door closed. So no one, either the students or the visitors would know if it's a live performance or not. So it's often just about scales. It never was a complete piece of music, what you hear. Third part of the project is in the Royal Garden area. Next to this 16th century monument, I created a fairly large, perfectly circular bronze wind chime. And we were lucky that we encountered 4 gigantic lime trees, and that became our support, which is all done with calculation of the strength of the ropes and hung from this the treetop. So when you're standing there, the wind comes. You feel the wind touching your face, and then you hear the sound of the bells. And then when the wind goes, the sound goes away. All 3 sounds are creating these magical sounds because of who they are, and it's not because there's somebody like you or me standing in front of them, therefore they perform for you. This reflects my encounter with Mount Stewart, that it has been there, the historical part of it, 1,000 years. And here I was being very lucky to encounter it, and therefore my response to Mount Stewart. Excuse me. So from there, we'll go to northern India, Sri Lanka, and then ends in Brisbane, Australia. Most of you know that the historical Buddha, Siddhartha, was a prince. When he was meditating and sitting underneath a Bodhi tree, he was enlightened and became one of the great teachers. So that happened 2,500 years ago. Around 2,300 BC, which is 200 years later, 2,300 years ago, there was an eradication of Buddhism. The actual tree that witnessed the enlightenment of Buddha was already kept in the palace ground as a sacred, holy object and living being. But the destruction of Buddhism, their final goal is to go and cut down this tree. So at that time, King Ashoka was the reigning king, and his daughter happened to be a Buddhist nun. So she heard of this destructive force, therefore she went into her father's garden the night before, took a branch, hid in her robe, and escaped to Ceylon, which is current-day Sri Lanka. This was a mural that depicting her saga or voyage from northern India to Ceylon. So this, what does it have to do with me? That happened, 2,300 years ago. When Queensland Art Gallery was planning for a new museum called the Queensland Museum of Modern Art, they asked me to create a permanent project for them. So I say, well, great, but I'm going to be very naughty. What I'm going to do is I am going to go to Ceylon, bring a sapling from this original tree that witnessed the enlightenment of Buddha, back to your museum, plant it in the garden as a sacred object, but also as a piece of artwork. As you can imagine, the kind of conversation between not only the curators and the departments, but also between countries, because Sri Lanka considers this tree as their sacred tree and as national treasure, and no secular institution has ever came to them and asked for a sapling for the past 2,300 years. So after 4 years of very good luck and patience, we were able to come. And I think what happened was that I visited Sri Lanka many times. The last time I went there, I talked to the high priest by saying, for me, in contemporary society, we go to museums to have that sense of enlightenment. And this is almost like when people go to temples and churches back then to feel that connection. That's when it clicked with him and he said, good, I understand what you're saying. Please come back in 8 months. I'll prepare this for you. So this is that original tree. And all the villagers were sitting underneath the mother trees and chant to the mother tree 24/7 for a whole week, when they know that there is an artist coming to invite a sapling from this tree to go to Australia. So everybody, when that day when I arrived, all the villager again lined up to touch that sapling, which is underneath the yellow parasol. So there she was, a tiny little sapling that witnessed the enlightenment of Buddha. When the high priest handed over to me, he was speaking in Pali, but once he gave it to me, he spoke in English, which I think is for my sake. So he told the tree that you are a sacred being. You are going to go to an exotic land called Australia that no sacred creature has ever ventured to. You need to be as strong as you can and become a big tree to create shade and shadow and take care of the sentient beings there. So at that very moment, I thought I was going to I almost dropped the plan because it was just emotionally and historically very heavy for me. These were two angels that helped me through the terrain for the past 4 years and got to this point of welcoming the tree back to Australia. So I was very naive. I took the plan and was boarding Qantas airline, and they stopped me right there. Say, this is an exotic plant, and we can't let it go to Australia without quarantine. So I actually had to use DHL to send her over to Brisbane, and she was for 6 months. The uncanny thing is that the custom officer who was taking care of her was from Sri Lanka, and her house was only about a mile away from the sacred tree. So she was so grateful that she had this life-changing experience of taking care of a sacred being that came from her country. 2008, when the museum opened, I worked with the Taiwanese nuns to create a sacred ceremony to plant this tree. So every year on Buddha's birthday, these nuns would come and chant to the Bodhi tree 24 hours. So it's imbued in sacred energy for the next year. So this is a beautiful picture. Someone sent it to me with the father and the child taking a little nap underneath the Bodhi tree. So she's grown very fast. Their life is about 4,000 years old. So next, I'm sure she's going to outlive everything around her. Next time when you go to Queensland and visiting Goma, Gallery of Modern Art, please go say hello to the tree and just enjoy her beauty in the shade. Luminous Depths. This was a commission for the Peranakan Museum 3 years ago in Singapore. This is a very exotic picture for me. They look like Chinese, but actually for my eyes, they're not. So around 16th century, again, when Ming Dynasty was falling and the Manchu were climbing through the Great Wall, a lot of Chinese men went south, but they didn't take their wives with them. So they local, the indigenous, the Malays, and the Indians there, and created this group of people called Peranakan. Now when you go to Singapore, about half of those people are Peranakan. And this is a picture of showing the Chinese, ethnic Han Chinese men marrying the Peranakan ladies. A bedchamber that is of Peranakan heritage. When Alan Chung, the director who was actually at the Gardner Museum, now he's the director of Peranakan Asian Civilization Museum in Singapore, he said, Mingwei, come and do a project. I'm one of those artists that just never goes away, right? So he said, well, come and do a project at Peranakan Museum. One of the challenges of the Peranakan Museum was that the collection in there is highly debatable because It was donated by two very wealthy families in Singapore. However, when the other Peranakan came to look at these objects that are supposed to be from their heritage, most of them do not recognize them because now we understand it's because of the social differences. So I thought it would be very interesting to talk about those differences. So that's one part of the project. The other part of the project is that I was so inspired by the light and the sound that was cascading down from the top floor of the museum, which reminded me very much of some of the traditional Peranakan family that you still can see in Singapore, Malaysia, and probably Indonesia. The first part of the project, I created this installation that goes into the atrium, the middle part of the museum. This is 3D, and the next image I'm going to show you is actually pretending you're standing here and then looking over to this wall. So this is what you see when you first come into the museum. There were always about 50 of these ceramic pots, and they are for you to purchase they are basically $5 US. The idea of, I'll explain to you why there is a monetary means to this particular component. So just assume that you want the object, you use $5 to purchase them, you carry this with you when you went through the gallery and the museum to see the other things in the museum while having this very fragile thing in your hand. So this is the second floor, still looking at this, looking at other gallery objects and still have this thing in your hand. When you go up to the third floor, this is what you see. And there was a voice singing, again, one of the Shuba leader that is filled in the space. Okay? So when you're standing on this platform with a ceramic in your hand, it somehow the motion of you standing on the platform cuts off the sound. So you're standing there alone with this object. And what are you supposed to do next? Not to throw yourself down, but to throw the ceramic down. Okay? This became quite, you can just imagine the crashing sound of the ceramic falling from the third floor and hitting the marble floor. I think it was very brave of Alan to allow me to do it, especially in a classical museum, to smash something, smash an artwork. The idea was that I wanted to have people transform Lee Mingwei's work into something different, and I'll explain to you what that difference is. So, do you remember I say about the $5 exchange there? After the exhibition, we had actually $25,000 in the curatorial budget. So I will be going back to Singapore either this year or next year. We will have a symposium with all the heads of Peranakan and the curators to discuss what is Peranakan. And using this money as a seed money to go out and purchase one single object that will come back to the museum collection as a single artwork that everyone, at least most of the Peranakan, will agree this is truly Peranakan. So, and then people ask me, so what did you do to, what happened to this pile of ceramic? So the Peranakan Museum was building a new part of the museum. So now all the shards are in the foundation of the new building. So imagine if 500 years later, if somebody did an excavation of this museum, they'll find the shards of ceramic from this project, and therefore connecting back to an event that happened 500 years ago, let's say. Yes. Last project, Guernica sand. The first time I encountered Picasso Guernica was 1979. I was between Taiwan and Dominican Republic. So I lived in Santo Domingo for 2 years before I moved to San Francisco. I was so shocked and overwhelmed to see this painting because when I was growing up in Taiwan, the only museum we went to was the National Palace Museum. All I encountered was Song Dynasty painting of birds and flowers, these beautiful mountains and river, but never anything so shocking and political as Guernica. So that really made a big impression in my mind. What I did is that I created a very large sand painting. This is actually bigger than the Guernica by Picasso. There are 3 stages to the work. The first stage is probably the first, let's say, 7 weeks of the exhibition. It's not an interactive project at this point. It's just for you to see. Over here, underneath the light, you can see buckets, which suggest something is going to happen later. So the first 7 weeks, this is what you experience. We used 15 tons of sand and create this very, very thick sand painting. The second phase or second stage of the project is that on the 8th week, Monday morning at sunrise, I walked down to the sand painting, try to finish the last part of the sand painting, which also is a signal to the audience that one person from the audience can walk on the sand painting. You can just imagine the tension between these 2 people. And I'm not even talking about who's creating, who's destroying. There's just the tension, the poetry, and the tangle between these 2 people. So one person finishes, the other person takes on. It continues throughout the whole day. This was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There was also an artificial rock for the participant to stand, to sit, just to observe, to think about what is happening around them. Right before the sunset, the last person finishes. I just spend some time patching up what people did as much as I can. To conclude the second part, I and 3 other assistants, each of us had a broom, and start brushing the sand to the middle. So this is the beginning of the 3rd stage, which as sunset was clearly still a Guernica, and as sunrise, 8 hours ago, it was like that. When I did this in Tokyo, a Zen Buddhist monk came to me and said, for him, when this was like that, and undisturbed, it really, it has a sense of death mask to it. However, when it's transformed like that, life came from underneath it and became a different version of Guernica for him. So all of Guernica is still there. It's just the relationship between each of the grain has slightly changed, which creates a very different reality. Thank you so much. So I will open up to Q&A, and you can ask me any questions. Thank you.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand and then wait until the mic comes to you to ask that question.
Why did you call the tree, that lovely story, she?
Yes. I always feel somehow a very feminine part of that tree, and there's no logic explanation. I just always feel it's a very feminine and soft and warm and generous living being for me. Yeah. Okay, I'll let Jasmine. Yes.
I have what might be a trivial question, and I can explain afterwards why I'm asking. When you show this piece about Guernica, I keep looking at the three baskets, the three trash baskets at the back, and I keep wondering what they are and why they're there.
Oh, yes. Those were where I contained the sand for creating the last part of it. And it's very interesting you ask that question because it has to do with a part of a performance for me. Imagining right before I got up to get the broom, I physically actually could not carry those three baskets with me with sand in there, and that's why I moved them to the side so I could continue the performance. And in fact, we left it there for the duration of the third stage. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, I wanted to say thank you very much for your talk and your ideas, which I think are just very important in today's world, not just the art world, but in humanity in general, the world in general.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank you because I have used your idea, the Mending Project, for a number of years to ask my students at the museum school to make a mending project.
Yes.
And in fact, it draws amazing work out of them, and I want to thank you for that. And often when I talk about it and show the slides of you at work, I mention another concept, which maybe you're familiar with, which is urushi, the Japanese practice of mending bowls with gold.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wondered if you had ever seen a movie, well, sort of two parts. I wondered if you have ever done anything with urushi. And the other thing is, I wondered if you had seen a film called The Road Home by Zhang Ziyi. And I hope, she's the actress, but I hope you do see it sometime.
I'll definitely.
Yes, but
check
I'm
that
curious
out.
about your connection with urushi, if you care to elaborate.
I actually came upon the idea of urushi only quite recently when I was doing the Mending Project. Actually, one of the participant, not the mender, participant, brought a mended bowl with gold and say, look, this is what we've been doing. And in fact, part of the tradition came from Korea. So the Koreans are really, and you see in contemporary ceramic Korea that there are several artists doing that. I would love to learn. In fact, I was so excited and inspired by what she was saying, so I went online to see if I can get tools of making it at home and breaking my own bowl and see if that works. But yeah, I also love the idea. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
For the tree, I was wondering, how did you select the specific location, the new location?
Yes, that specific location was actually a long negotiation with the museum, not me, not through me. It was the curator who curated that show. And at first, the museum didn't want an unusual living project in front of their museum, literally at the entrance of the museum. So they pushed it to the side near the parking lot, right? So, and I'm usually not the kind of person saying, oh, this is not going to happen, so I'm not going to do it. I just thought, okay, we'll see where it goes. Gradually, when the museum is almost to a finished point, the curator and the director were talking, and then the curator brought this conversation up again and saying, we really need a beautiful tree for people to just wait if they wanted to come into the museum before, and actually it's also in front of the bookstore. And so she approached it in a different way, rather than we need to have a contemporary art here. She just said, we need a tree, a beautiful tree for people to take care of. So now that tree is there, and I'm very grateful because somebody told me that it's not only the Buddhist practitioner who will come and chant to the tree. The indigenous spiritual people also will come and do the same thing, and also other spiritual practices would come and chant to the tree. So in many ways, that tree became a sacred object for the community, and not just understanding it from a Buddhist point of view. Yeah. Yes, Louis. By the way, sorry, this is Louis Hyde. May I introduce you? I owe a lot to Louis because of his important thinking, and all my work is based, inspired by his writing. So thank you, Louis. Yes.
I hope I can ask a question that lives up to that.
Yes.
So Dogen Zenji says that we study the self to forget the self. And I'm curious about your sense of the presence of yourself in the work.
Mm.
And to add a twist to this, the very first piece, which was the folded money,
Mm.
in a way your hand is present in that.
Yes.
So we can think of the hand as representative of the self in the work.
Yeah.
So can you speak about the presence of yourself in the work?
Yes, the presence of myself, I often think of it as it's both physical and spiritual and emotional self in there. I remember after spending 6 years or 6 summers in a Chan monastery in Taipei, one of the most amazing experience for me was my teacher one day asked me to explain to him what an apple is and he said, I have an hour for you to explain. And so he sort of made a little ring and he said, please go ahead. So I thought, oh, that's very easy. So I say, oh, apple is a fruit, it's sweet, it's sour, it's red, blah, blah, blah. Within 30 seconds, I ran out of explanation. And that was the most awkward 59 and a half minutes in my whole life. And at the end, he rang the bell again and say, taste this apple. When I bit into it, that's exactly what an apple is. And nobody can share with me, and I can never explain that to anybody until the experience. So it's coming back to my projects. Although I created these projects conceptually, but for example, the Sonic Blossom, the singers and the receivers, the people who are participating, they all become an integral part of that project and creating that project simultaneously. So I see it as a part of an organism that's called Sonic Blossom that was started by Lee Mingwei, but without these support, and if I physically still is in there, then the project will not grow for me. I have to extract myself physically from the project, but to be supportive of it by coming to visit the singers almost every week and just show them that I'm here. So that's the kind of presence of not being present. Yeah. Thank you.
And we have time for one more question.
Actually, this is a follow-on question to the one, and it's about your creative process, and you've actually explained a lot of it, but say you're in Sonic Blossoms right now. You're obviously probably thinking of how do you get to the next project? What makes you go to the next one?
Yes, now I have 3 other projects going on, but I think what you're asking is how do ideas come to me, or how do I invite these ideas? As I told the student today, I always think and believe that project idea comes to look for me. I do not go look for them. Just like when we go to sleep tonight, we don't go look for our dream. They come and visit you at the darkness of night. And if they are magical enough, it would transform you. So these are what you see here, or other projects that the artists have done. For me, these are those transformative dreams that transform my life and also people who encounter them. So I just say, I don't know where they came from. They are magical in their own way and comes and go. And if I don't have enough energy to pay attention to their voice, then it just disappears and goes somewhere else. So I have to be quite patient and very, very quiet to wait for their arrival. Great. Thank you
Thank you.
so much.